Now, when a new partner comes into business, it is not necessary that the value of the assets or the liabilities which are given in the books of accounts are equal to the fair value. The value of the assets disclosed in the books of accounts may be less, right? Let's say, for example, if you acquired a building for 5,000 10 years ago, the value today may be 50,000, or it may be more. So let's say, for example, there was an investment you make at 10,000, but due to fall in the market, the value of the investment is now only 8,000, right? Or it could be that some of the assets are not recorded in the books of accounts themselves. Similarly, for the liabilities, the value of the liabilities may be less in the books of accounts, it may be more, or they may not be provided for only, right? In all these cases, before a new partner comes in, the existing partner may decide that we want to reinstate the value of these assets or liabilities in the books of accounts. In order to carry this out, a revaluation account, sometimes also known as the profit and loss adjustment account, is drawn up, right? The underlying logic is whatever may be the increase or the decrease in the value of an asset or a liability, it is provided for, which means, let's say, for example, if the asset is 10,000 in the balance sheet, whereas the fair value is 12,000, we are going to pass an entry where we will debit the asset account to increase the value to 12,000. The corresponding debit or credit is going to go to the revaluation account, right? Similarly for the liabilities, so let's look at what accounting entries are done. So let's say, for example, an asset was recorded at less than fair value in the books of accounts, right? So like I said, there's a building which is in the books of accounts at 10,000, the fair value is 12,000. What do I need to do? I need to increase the value of the building by 2,000. So I am going to debit building Y, because building is an asset, and an increase in the value of the asset can be reflected by debiting the corresponding assets to revaluation account, right? Suppose there is asset is at more than fair value. Investment in books is at 10,000, whereas the fair value is 8,000. I need to write down the value of investment by 2,000. What will I do? I will credit the investment, because investment is an asset. So when I credit, the value of the investment is going to go down in the books of accounts, and I will debit the revaluation account, right? The third situation could be that there are certain unrecorded assets. Okay. What this means is, suppose I suddenly get to know that a person who was not paying my amount, whom I had written off, was a debtor, has agreed to pay me 10,000 rupees, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to reinstate that debtor in my books of accounts. So I will pass an entry where I will debit the debtor account by 10,000 to revaluation account, right? Just like this, there could be the other side also. If there is an increase in the asset, there could be an increase in the liability also, right? So if I look at it, how would it look like? So if a liability is at less than fair value, or the amount which has to be paid for such a liability, what am I going to do? I'm going to increase the liability, right? So let's say, for example, I had an employee whom I thought I had to pay 5,000, and I had provided for this 5,000 in my books of accounts. But on final calculation, I came to know that not 5, but 7 is what is payable. So I am going to increase my employee liability account, okay, by 2,000, the corresponding debit would go to revaluation account. Why? Because like I said, revaluation is just like a profit and loss account. If there's an increase in a liability, it's a loss. Therefore, I'm debiting profit and loss account and crediting the liability account. If something is more than fair value, I thought the rent which was to be paid is 20,000, right? But actually it turned out that it was 18,000. So I'm going to reduce my existing liability. I will debit the rent payable account, which is a liability account, by 2,000, and it's a gain for me, so I will credit the profit and loss again account, which is revaluation account, right? So when making these accounts, the only thing you need to bear in mind is, by virtue of what is happening, is there a gain that I am having, or is there a loss that I am having? If I'm incurring a loss, the revaluation account will be debited. If there's a gain, then the revaluation account will be credited. Gain could be through increase in the value of asset, or reduction in liability, or recording a new asset. Loss could be reduction in asset, increase in liability, or an unrecorded liability, right? After all these adjustments are done, we can prepare the revaluation account, pass all the debit entries, pass all the credit entries. The difference which is there would go to the old partners in old profit sharing ratio. Why? Because whatever is there is to the old partners account. Whether it's a gain, which may be when the credit side totals are more than the debit side, or it's a loss, both has to go to the old partners in the old profit sharing ratio.